Hello, I'm Holger. I'm here to talk about my feelings. I'm very excited to be here. Well, excited is probably not the right word. I'm very scared. I'm scared of heights. I'm scared of stages. A little bit scared of the color red. But at least you guys are enjoying the night, right? That might change. Imagine someone comes up to you and invites you to travel to Afghanistan right now. Someone you like, someone you trust comes up to you and says, I'd like to invite you to come to Afghanistan with me, visit the country, do some work, have an impact. How would you react? In the fall of 2015, I received this invitation from a friend and a business partner. I had been working with startups in Afghanistan for a while and remotely from Germany, but it was kind of time to meet the people that I was working with. And it's a beautiful country. But then I thought, it's Afghanistan. It's a war zone. Nice idea to go, but no. Obviously not. It's insane. Welcome to my dilemma. It was a great opportunity. It was incredibly scary. And of course, my answer was no. That's me in the middle, 4 weeks later. About 1 week outside of Kabul, I went to Afghanistan and I didn't die. When I tell people about this trip, many times the response is, oh wow, how brave, how courageous. To go to a country like Afghanistan, you must be so brave. At least that's what they say to my face. And I've done a number of things that gets this reaction. I've founded about a dozen companies, and I ended a promising consulting career to go live in the jungle and advise NGOs for free. And I lived out of a camper van without a residence for a while, and I privately flew into a war zone. And you need courage for that, right? Well, that's not true. I'm neither brave nor courageous. In fact, I scare very easily. But I found a simple 4-step hack that lets me do these things. And by found, I mean I stumbled upon them. And today I want to share these 4 steps with you, along with the story of how I stumbled upon them. So let's go back to the summer of 1998. We're in the back of an old, pretty smelly Mercedes. It's warm, and I'm on the way back from the Frankfurt airport. I had just spent a glorious year as an exchange student in California. And the best thing about this year as an exchange student in high school in California was, of course, the money. Because what they don't tell you is, when you're an exchange student, you're guaranteed an allowance so you can support yourself. So I had lived for a year when I was 16 on $150, and this is 1998 or 1997, per month. So I'm in the back of the car and I just rejoined my parents, and with all the love I had inside of myself, I asked my mother the one question on my mind, where's my money? Because obviously I was going to receive that money, right? And she, with all the love inside of herself, pulled the car over, went to a newspaper stand, bought a newspaper, tossed it in the back of the car and said, you want money? Get a job. So I did. I had learned HTML programming, as we called it back then, and how to build websites. And with that skill set in 1998, it was pretty easy to find a job. In fact, the market was so hungry for programmers that by the time I was 17, I had founded 4 companies and had about a dozen people working for me. Great, right? Well, maybe. Because that's when the panic attacks started. I don't remember the first panic attack I had, but I remember what it felt like. Kind of like this right now. And you all know what it feels like, because a panic attack is basically a fear reaction. You've ever been robbed or caught cheating on a test, or you climbed on the diving platform at your public swimming pool only to realize that it really wasn't a good idea. That's what it feels like. Scientifically speaking, this is what it looks like. So what happens? You have a fear reaction in your brain, and your brain releases hormones. adrenaline, noradrenaline, others. What this does is it increases your chance of survival. Your pupils dilate, you can see better, it shuts off your non-vital functions. For example, right now, I have no digestion whatsoever. Really. And what happens is that your body concentrates on the big parts, on the big muscle groups, right? My hands are like ice right now because all the blood went out of my fingers into my arm because I have much more chance of defeating that wolf with a swing of my arm than with a prick of my pinky. So that's what happens, and your heart rate goes up and everything. So that's what happens when you have a fear reaction. And a panic attack is basically that. It's a fear reaction with two major differences. There's no trigger. It comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't stop when the threat is gone. It can go on for a very long time. In my case, sometimes for hours or for days. And I can explain this to you today, but back then I didn't really know what was going on. I had panic attacks. I was fearful all the time. They became chronic, and they had no visible triggers, and they just became part of my reality and part of me. One day I was a kid who would go with Bana and say, you know, just do it and just go ahead and found a company and do it. And then overnight, I was more the, well, just leave it type. Can I just stay in my bed a little bit longer? This is my comfort zone. So for some reason, I was the opposite of brave now, and I had to accept that, and I had to move on, and I had to stumble forward. And I kept founding companies because that is really the only thing I'm good at. And I was building websites and working, and I became a consultant, and then I became a project manager. And while I was doing that, I spent a lot of time hiding in toilets and in hallways and in my bed. And my career, if you want to call it that, kind of went well. But I started noticing that I was missing the big ones. While at university, for example, I had started a software project, and that's one of the biggest business regrets I have to this day, a financial planning software. Now, this is 15 years ago, long before people were talking about AI and big data and machine learning and robot learning. And we had a software where if you were a poor student and you were always broke and you couldn't figure out why, you could feed the software your banking transactions, and the software would tell you why. And it would warn you. And you can guess where the motivation came from. And it was a really cool piece of software. And we get tens of thousands of downloads. And one day someone came up to me and said, why don't we start selling this? You know, we can sell this to banks. And I said, nah. My bank implemented this 2 years ago. I had very cool job offers that I didn't take, and I noticed more and more big projects that I turned down after I had turned them down. And I turned them down quickly, and I turned them down without thinking, and that was bad. And I missed out on a couple of really, really cool journeys that way. And I turned them down in a heartbeat. Fast forward to 2004. I was an up-and-coming management consultant, very full of himself, despite the anxiety. This is what I looked like back then. I swear if I shave, I look like that today. So one day I was sitting in a project with an experienced consultant, and we were talking about a huge project. He had been given this huge project, and the project was so big, if it failed, it would cost him his job, it would probably cost him his entire career, maybe his marriage. It was really, really high risk. And he was so irritatingly cool. There was no fear. So I asked him, how many projects of this kind have you done? He said, not one, it's huge. And I said, well, why aren't you scared? And he said, oh, it's a very scary project, but I don't look at the whole project. I took the project and I broke it down into 12 sub-projects, and I took every sub-project and broke it down into work streams, and I look at the work streams and what needs to be done there. Because if I look at the whole project, I don't sleep at night, and I lose my wife, my marriage, and I get ulcers. So that was really cool. And the project was hard, and we did it, and it kind of got out in the end, and many of you use what this project was about. But for me, it was like finding a secret book of spells. I had found out how I can take a big, scary thing and break it down, and how I could handle it. Cool. And I immediately knew, had I deconstructed that software selling thing, I could have done it. And had I deconstructed that really cool job that I turned down because I just couldn't imagine it, I would have taken it. So now all I needed to do was use this technique of deconstruction and apply it to my fears. Cool. What did I do about it? Absolutely nothing. It didn't work. Whenever I was scared, and I didn't deconstruct, and I just froze and just said, nah. And there's a biological reason for nah. And the biological reason for that is that in your head, the exact same thing happens when you have a fear reaction. So just like the blood goes from my fingers to my bigger muscle groups, the brain takes all of the energy and the sugar and all the stuff that makes the brain work and moves it towards older, ancient regions of your brain that deal with the big picture. And that prevents you from deconstructing and from breaking it down. You just see this big thing and, I can't imagine it, not doing it. So what had happened was I had found number 2 of the hack, step number 2, before step number 1. And that was actually face your fear. Realize I am in a fear reaction right now, and when you've done that, you can control the reflex of saying, nah, and you can start deconstructing it. The journey really picked up speed now. So I had learned how to break up big scary things into smaller things, and I had learned that I needed to consciously control doing that and control the reflex. At this time, I wasn't happy with my job for various reasons. I really wanted to leave and get another job, which was scary to me. It was my first big job. And I had put off this topic for a while because it was just so scary to even think about. But now I had the 2-step approach and I could tackle it. So I went on with it. I sat down and I deconstructed my fear of quitting this job. What was behind that cloudy gut feeling? And I came up with a good list. Not finding a new job, the new boss sucks worse than the old boss, I could make less money, I could disappoint mother, maybe I would have to move, maybe the project would be boring. I deconstructed it. The result was breathtaking. Like literally, I couldn't breathe because I had a panic attack because it was so scary. Because what I had done was I had taken this fuzzy kind of nyah thing and I had converted it into 20 piercingly sharp, fearful things. And they kept me up at night. And I was stuck again, and I didn't quit my job, and I just kind of put it in a drawer, and after a while you get used to it, and so I continued miserably in my old job, and then I met my next hero, a mathematician. He was my project manager on a risk management project, and the thing is, I had no idea what risk management was, and I told him that. And he said, every risk is just a multiplication. Probability times impact, make one of them 0, and the risk goes away. That's all you need to know. With the empathy of a mathematician. So, okay, so there was obviously a science behind risks. Awesome. I had to learn it. I joined the Global Association of Risk Professionals, and I started studying risks. Here's what you need to know. Every risk is made up of the impact and the probability. And there's a science of quantifying this stuff, right? With percentages and multiplicators, and then you can put money into this. You don't need to worry about that. What's interesting is that you can develop strategies to look at the risk. And you can do 3 things, basically. You can decrease the probability, you can decrease the impact, or you can accept the risk. That's risk management. You're welcome. So I broke down all of the risks of quitting my job, and for every one of those, I looked at the impact and I looked at the probability. So for example, getting a new boss that sucks worse than the old boss, I can decrease the probability by making sure I get to know the new boss before I sign the contract. I can decrease the impact if I'm willing to move again and just quit the job right away, if I find out that he sucks worse than the old one. And this is how I started to manage all of these risks. And that's the 3rd step of the hack, manage your risks. So I worked as a management consultant by this time in my end 20s, and at some point the anxiety and the panic attacks were gone. And I'd love to say that I cured myself with a hack, but that's not the truth, and it's only part of the truth, and I never quite figured out where the anxiety came from, because with all those phobias, I didn't get far enough in my therapy before I got scared of the therapist, that it just didn't work out. But anyways, mental health is much more complex than a 1, 2, 3 hack. But the hack can't cure anxiety or panic attacks, but it forced me to come up with a hack. And after the anxiety was gone, I didn't need to use it to board a plane anymore or to get out of bed or to do the little things or the big projects. But now I had a hack that enabled me to do basically anything I wanted. So I became an investment banker. I had no experience in the field. I had always sucked at math, and economic theory seemed like voodoo to me. But I was very curious, and it seemed like a really hard thing to do, and I was really bored. And there was this charter program that you could do, 3 or 4 years of hardcore studying, failure rate of 65%. Super scary. Wanted to do it. And I had my hack, and I went on. And I applied my hack, and I threw everything I had at this thing. After I had faced the fear, I had deconstructed everything about this program. I had managed the risks in detail, a couple of weeks of work of actually doing that. Then I threw everything I had at it. 2 hours in the morning before work, 2 hours at night after work, every Saturday, every Sunday, for 3 or 4 years. As the months progressed, I lost momentum. I was alone, and I couldn't get forward, and I was starting getting doubts. Would I fail the exam? Would all this be for nothing? I started to freeze again, and I was feeling this coming up again, and I hit another wall. One night I was so exhausted and frustrated, I went outside. I went on my balcony, and my neighbor was on his balcony. Now, I had never really talked to the guy. I had seen him in the elevator a couple of times, and he was like, "What's up?" And I did what every normal person would do. I told him the entire story. I told him about becoming an investment banker, about the risks, about my hack, about how I had deconstructed it, and how I was having doubts. And the poor guy listened for 20 minutes in the freezing cold. And he nodded. And it turned out he had done the exact same thing the year before. I got really lucky that night, and he sat me down, and he looked at the stuff that I was doing, and he said, "This works, this doesn't work, you have to look at this, you have to get this calculator," and he became my mentor, and he helped me through this exam, and he helped me to add step number 4 to the hack, find a mentor. Very few things that are unknown to me are unknown to everyone else, and it doesn't matter, you know, going to Afghanistan, starting companies, passing hard exams, whatever you're doing, there's always someone who's done it before you. And turns out most someones are really happy to help. So this is when I learned that it really pays to have a mentor to help you on your journeys. So here's the complete 4-step hack. Face your fear, deconstruct it, manage the risks, and find a mentor. And this works for all kinds of challenges and scary journeys. One of the scariest things I tackled with this is making a baby. When the time came around that it was time to have the talk about having a baby, my fear reaction was strong. I get panic attack reruns like once or twice a year. That was that. So I sat down and made this. This is the entire deconstruction of all of my fears and all of the risks involved in having a baby. From dropping it on its head to the question, how long will I have to deal with shit? When will I have the first meaningful conversation with that kid? What can it do? Everything is in there. And it works. And every time someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, you're a father now, are you scared or anything?" I'm like, "No, man, I'm not." The hack enabled me to travel the world for 2 years, found a bunch of companies, get out on the other hand, on the other end in one piece when the companies failed, because most of them tend to. It helped me to become stuff. I became a photographer, I became a restaurant tester because I really wanted to eat for free. One of the scariest things was I became the full-time blogger, and lived out of a camper van for a while. You can't live as a blogger, it doesn't, but you know, I went on the journey anyways. So, how did I use it to go to Afghanistan? Well, I faced the fact that my first reflex was just that, a fear reflex, and probably a very healthy one. And then I deconstructed all of the dangers of that trip. I have lists at home. Ways to die in Afghanistan, ways to get kidnapped in Afghanistan, ways to get the runs in Afghanistan. And I'm looking at impact and probability for each of those. And I had mentors. I called up people that were there, and I talked to them, and I showed them my lists, and I said, and they said, well, you know, you're missing this, and this is not going to happen, and you know, we can't do anything about that. And that helped, and that made this idea and this opportunity manageable. And in the end, almost no courage was needed to actually go. Coincidentally, this is me on this day 3 years ago. It was my first day in Kabul. And that's inside the Darul Aman Palace. And I was told back then that we were the first Westerners to enter it for a couple of decades because, well, it's really hard to get in there, and we had to tell a really funny story to the soldiers guarding it to even get in. But do you need courage to go on that journey? Well, I didn't, because I don't really have it. And if I can do that without any measurable amount of bravery, anyone can. Enjoy your hacking your fears. The journeys are usually worth it. Thank you.